Good evening. This is Maestro Cotello with a Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite Modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Quest Heresy. Our first player right here is Dark Riku as the Space Marine Apothecary, a healing commander, and his opponent is Noisy as the Sindri Trollface Chaos Sorcerer, a spellcasting commander. So this was game 2 of Dark Riku's and Noisy's quarter-final set from the July monthly Rumble tournament. Again, this set was really the set of the tournament, with game 3 being the game of the tournament. Right here we have game 2. And I wanted to, again, just build on some of the things I said about Noisy being a proactive player. Now, he went straight with his Sorcerer as part of his opening move, going right to Riku's VP and trying to interrupt that capture or just starting the fight immediately. Now, again, this is something that Noisy does that very few players don't do. Most people, they'll use all of their opening units to start getting their resources captured so that they can get their resources going. But Noisy aggressively engages. Now, in this particular situation, I don't think it quite paid off, but sometimes part of what he's going for is that he might be going for, like, early resource denial. He might be doing something like actually winning an engagement and then getting a decap off on a VP, or probably optimally a power point, or maybe a requisition point. He's even got his Heretic squad over here, and again, it doesn't look like he ultimately won those engagements, but that might be part of what he's trying to do, and just, again, something that he does differently that a lot of other people don't do. It's just atypical, not standard, and just a good way to see it. Just seeing it is a good way to kind of break away from just a lot of the traditional ways of thinking about how to play this game. Now, I talked a lot about the fact that Noisy went for this triple Heretic build, which really seems to be like a good choice for the Sorcerer. It's something that, again, not terribly common among low or even mid-level players, and it's something I mostly see out of Noisy and players like Noisy and Tex. It can be very, very powerful. Now, one of the things that Noisy does that a player like Tex doesn't do as much, although I've seen him do it too, is that he actually throws a Chaos Space Marine on top of these 3 Heretics. Now, with this build, this is an extremely rec-heavy build, and he's basically spending all of his opening requisition on getting these 4 units out. So he has 4 units out before Riku has 4 squads out before Riku can get his 4th squad out. So he just has more squads, and that's going to give him an early map control advantage, an early ability to win engagements. He may even get a wipe on these scouts right here if he actually moves the Heretics into position. So I'm actually surprised to see him not move those Heretics into position. Probably could have wiped that scout squad right there instead of just getting that requisition point captured. Now, the Chaos Space Marines, I've often said that I feel they underperform a bit in Tier 1, and specifically in this matchup, I feel they underperform a little bit. Since they lose to the Tactical Marines in a straight-up fight, they do less damage while not having something like Kraken Bolts to give them even more damage. They also are often, until you get a Havoc, or if the Havoc's not on the field, Chaos Space Marines are the next priority for a jump unit like Assault Space Marines, and you can expect Space Marine players to get Assault Space Marines if you're playing as Chaos. It's just one of the best options that Space Marines have against Chaos in Tier 1. It is very difficult to deal with as Chaos, and if your opponent, for whatever reason, does not get Assault Space Marines, they've just made the matchup a lot easier for you. It's just really a lot... It just really makes it a lot easier if, for whatever reason, they choose not to get Assault Space Marines. So if you are a Space Marine player, do get Assault Space Marines against Chaos. And if they actually get triple Heretics to counter it, just be ready with counters like Purification Rites or Shotgun Scouts. And we see that this time Riku has gotten Shotgun Scouts. Now he has Shotgun Scouts on both of them. I didn't see if he got those before his Assault Space Marines. I know he had one before the Assault Space Marines. But this time he seems to be putting more into the melee counters to deal with all of these Heretics. Now, those Chaos Space Marines, I started to talk about them, but yeah, again, they're not really going to be hitting that hard against the heavy armor of the Assault Space Marines and the Tax, and especially not with an Apothecary to actually just undo all of that damage with a heal. So these Chaos Space Marines, they really only slowly chip away at the Assault Space Marines and the attacks. Really, what's good about the Chaos Space Marines, first of all, they still serve a function that really just can't really be served by any other unit from the Tier 1 Chaos Arsenal. Just that basic range unit, the passive range damage output, along with the mobility of not being a suppression team. And of course, they are going to be doing better DPS from long range than a Havoc squad. That Havoc is the best suppression team for doing for suppressing, but the worst for doing damage. So you still want something like these Chaos Space Marines, or at least I do. Specifically, the best use they have in Tier 1 against a race like Space Marines is that they're good against the Scouts, because the Scouts don't have heavy armor, they don't really have a great health pool, and the Scouts are going to lose, pretty much going to lose in a direct fight against the Chaos Space Marines. And that gets your opponent to bleed Scout models. It also forces off their melee deterrents off the field, allowing your Heretics more room to breathe. So it's a little bit more difficult to force those Scouts off if all you have is a build of Heretics. Because then the Heretics are actually going to be controlled by those shotguns. And we see this time, Dark Riku really is respecting that early Heretic, triple Heretic opening by having both Purification Rights and the 2 shotguns. And as much as these Chaos Space Marines underperform a little bit in Tier 1, they really do come into their own by Tier 2 once you put a mark upgrade on them. Now, another use of these Chaos Space Marines is to, of course, whittle down the health of the Apothecary, either to force him off early to deny the heal to the Assault Space Marines or the Tactical Marines, where the heal is much better utilized, or even just to get the Apothecary to use the heal on himself. Again, better utilized on the Tactical Marines or the Assault Space Marines. But if he uses the heal on himself, then he won't be able to do it on the Assault Space Marines or the Tactical Marines. Now, Riku has also gone for the Sanguine Chainsword. This is probably the least common warrior upgrade for the Apothecary. And it's tough to say if it's the worst overall, but I mean, the Mastercrafted Bolter has a lot of utility in terms of being able to control a hero, especially one like the Sorcerer, as well as making the Apothecary a ranged hero and allowing him to stay back, stay in cover, stay directly out of the fight. And then that Power Axe can be very useful as well. What the Sanguine Chainsword is giving him is that it's giving the Apothecary a lot of staying power and a lot of early staying power. This because you can get that in Tier 1, whereas you can't get the Power Axe in Tier 1. So what that means is that he can actually, very early on, actually be used in a way to counter Heretics. He can restore his own health while bleeding a lot of models. This can make him pretty effective against Heretics, and it actually makes the heal on himself worth using, because he'll be a very effective Heretic counter using the Sanguine Chainsword as well as Purification Rights to knock over Heretics. And we see that Noisy has already lost one of his Heretic squads, which is very unfortunate for him, again, because I said one of the advantages of having those triple Heretics is that you can still have 2 Heretics for fighting, and then you can dedicate another one to map control. So now Noisy is in the tough situation that any Chaos player faces if they only choose to build 2 Heretics, which is they can choose to fight with 2 Heretics, and by doing that, they're having more effective fighting capabilities, but they might be sacrificing map control by not having a map control Heretic. Or they can choose to put the Chaos Space Marines on map control duty, and neither one of those is an optimal choice. Really, it is better to have that 3rd Heretic for map control, and then having both 2 Heretics for fighting as well as the Chaos Space Marines for fighting. Because again, without those Chaos Space Marines for fighting, you're not really going to be doing much to deter the Shotgun Scouts. You would be relying much more on the Havoc to pin the Shotgun Scouts, and then hoping that you're not going to be getting counter-initiate, or that you're not going to have the Assault Marines jumping on them. Looks like we have a Warp level to get his Heretics out on the field. And we have Aspiring Champions on both of these Heretics. Now, one of the things, and one of the reasons Noisy lost his 3rd Heretic, is that he did not have an Aspiring Champion on that 3rd Heretic. And with a triple heretic build, you kind of can't really afford to get aspiring champions on all three of your heretics. It's just way too expensive. And in order to make a triple heretic build work, you need to have very good micro, because you need to be able to keep those heretics alive. And specifically, you need to be able to keep a non-aspiring champion heretic alive, at least one, if not two or three, because those aspiring champions are expensive at 25 power. So 2 is 50 and 3 is 75. You can't afford to invest that kind of power unless you're really having an early map control advantage. And unfortunately for Noisy, his build isn't working out quite as well this time as it did last time. He did not get those early power bashes off. In fact, it was actually Riku who got the early power bashes off. And it's actually Riku who's now sitting on a full power farm.
Resource location understood.
Secured.
The enemy is capturing one of our victory points.
Now, Riku has gone for this. Not Riku. Noisy has gone for the Blood Crusher. Relatively cheap walker for Chaos. And one of the things that, because it's a cheap walker, it's a potentially rushable walker. Now, Noisy didn't exactly have the tech advantage, so he's not quite hitting the critical period. He basically never got to have the critical period of the Blood Crusher being at its most optimum stage, which is when your opponent is not even in tier 2, and they need to stall out until tier 2 when they can get a counter for this Blood Crusher. Riku is already in tier 2. He's already invested in Melta Bombs, and will he get a missile attack? Yes, he is. Now, I mean, on the side of... even the benefit of this Blood Crusher still is that it's getting Riku to spend quite a bit of power into countering this Blood Crusher. Now, I often say that Space Marines are the best race at getting emergency AV, because when you're trying to put anti-vehicle on the field in response to your opponent getting a vehicle, the prohibitive resource is not power. It's requisition. For a lot of races, a race like Chaos, or even just many other races that are not Space Marine, they more frequently have to spend something on the order of 300, 400, 500 requisition to buy an entirely new unit in order to counter a vehicle. Space Marines are slightly better off in this sense because they can easily upgrade Tactical Marines, Assault Space Marines, and Devastators, all to have some kind of anti-vehicle, so you can respond to an early vehicle. So, again, quite expensive on power. The Melta is, I believe, 30. Again, I'm always embarrassed when I don't remember a cost, but I believe it's 30. If it's not 30, it's 25. It was definitely 30 in retail, and I'm pretty sure it's still 30. And then those missile launchers, I believe 35. Hate to be unsure, but still something on the order of 60 to 70 power for, actually not, yeah, 60 to 70 power, which is certainly nothing to laugh at, and that is going to delay something. That's really going to delay Riku from getting some kind of more formidable tier 2 purchase of his own, like a Dreadnought or a Razorback. As it is, he's gone for a Librarian, which is somewhat of a curious choice. There was definitely a time in retail where getting a Librarian, there was nothing surprising about getting a Librarian. These days, it is slightly more of a niche purchase. It's definitely not a go-to purchase anymore for Space Marines. It can still be something that can still potentially be very, very good. But it's more like something that you would get on top of your first tier 2 purchase. So on top of Razorback or on top of a Dreadnought. Mainly because that smite isn't as ridiculous as it used to be. Certainly still useful, but not as good as it used to be. And we see that Noisy is still making this Blood Crusher work. It looks like Noisy lost another Heretic squad, which is really bad news for him. Now, in a way, you can, as the game goes on, you actually can forego Heretics for the purpose of fighting. You don't need Heretics for fighting as much as the game goes on, especially late tier 2 and tier 3. You don't need the Heretics as much for fighting, but you still need them. You need them for repairs and for worship, especially if you're going for a vehicle play. Right now, Riku, with only one Heretic, can really only support one vehicle adequately. or whether it's a Blood Crusher or a Dreadnought. So Noisy has the resources almost to put a Dreadnought or something on the field. He could put like a Heretic on top of that, since he's floating enough requisition that getting a new Heretic would really not be that big of a deal, although the bigger deal would be putting the Aspiring Champion on that Heretic. And now Noisy is going for a Dreadnought, so I think we can reasonably expect him to go for a new Heretic on top of that. But unfortunately, Noisy is about to probably lose much of his power farm. His Blood Crusher, again, it's going to take some time for that Blood Crusher to be restored to the point where it can actually fight again. And it might even be more important for Riku. Actually, Riku could definitely force off these attacks without actually fighting with the Heretics. Now, one of the things Noisy is doing, something that Noisy does that is very different from the way a lot of other people do things, is that, again, most people, they typically get one war gear per armor slot, and then they just commit to that war gear. If they have to, they'll switch to something else if they need it, but then they'll commit to that new war gear. What Noisy is doing, he's actually switching back and forth between the Robes of Torment and the Vestments of the Warp, and using both of them as he needs either one. Robes of Torment, very, very, very useful in this matchup for dealing with Assault Space Marines, as well as really anything melee coming out of the Space Marines. But again, mainly the Assault Space Marines, the Force Commander when you're playing against the Force Commander, and now it might actually even be nice to use that against the Apothecary as well. The Blood Crusher goes down. We even have a multi-melted Dreadnought, and the multi-melted Dreadnought will have a bit of an edge, I think, over the Chaos Dreadnought. The Chaos Dreadnought with the autocannon is going to have longer range, but the multi-melted Dreadnought does more damage by quite a bit. Right now, Dark Riku also has the better supplemental AV, since he already invested in those early counters for the Blood Crusher. He just has better supplemental AV in addition to his Dreadnought, to help deal with... Actually, now that Noisy has this las cannon, that might no longer be true. So now this could actually be Riku's Dreadnought down, which would really be exactly what Noisy needs. He hasn't been as dominating this game as he was in the last game. So we saw last game, basically, what happens when that long tier 1 from Noisy, when it actually goes right. This is a case where it hasn't gone as well, and we're just seeing how Noisy is adjusting. And he's not doing nearly as well, but he's still in this game. He still has his Dreadnought, but it looks like Riku is going to make a concerted push, maybe to take it out, even just with the Tactical Marines and his Assault Space Marines. Now the Assault Space Marines with the Melta and the Tactical Marines with the Missile Launcher, they are good emergency AV. And I often say emergency AV. Now, there are two dimensions to what I mean by that. First is that you're getting it quickly at a time when you really need any kind of AV, regardless of the quality of the AV. Secondarily, I say it as emergency AV because as far as quality of AV goes, it's not something where, in the absolute terms of everything that's available in the game, it's really not the best of what you can get. And normally, it wouldn't even really be adequate for taking out something like a Chaos Dreadnought, especially not a Chaos Dreadnought with a lot of support. Although Noisy is in a tough situation right now, where the Dreadnought is at only about 40% health. It looks like it might even go down because we do have this Missile Launcher Tactic in pursuit. It has been snared, but I think it just might get out of there. So again, usually this is something where that Missile Launcher and the Melt-A-Bomb isn't really enough to take out a tougher vehicle like this Chaos Dreadnought by itself. Unless you have a player unless Noisy isn't going to just back this Dreadnought off when it's only at one more hit and it will die. So this is really a time where Noisy really should bring it back to his base and get repairs, because one more hit, even just accidentally, or just one more hit is going to kill it, and then he's going to be sunk out of those resources, whereas he could take it back, and he would be sacrificing a lot of the field presence. But one of the things this was one of the big plays that Riku made, was that he destroyed... Riku destroyed the wall with the Assault Space Marine jump to give his Tactical Marines a clear shot to that Dreadnought. And I mean, he saw the Dreadnought right there. This isn't Company of Heroes with True Sight. He saw the Dreadnought. He saw how much health he had. Riku knew it was only going to be one more shot until it was dead. So I actually thought it was really surprising to see Noisy not pull that Dreadnought back. I mean, even one Melt-A-Bomb would have killed. Just one Melt-A-Bomb. And those Melt-A-Bombs are like auto-target. They home in. And now we have a Predator out in the field. And this is definitely at the point where this game really looks like it's going in Riku's favor. He's got the Predator out on the field. The best Noisy is going to do at this moment is this Las Cannon Havoc. He's getting another Bloodletter squad, and ideally he should really probably cancel this Bloodletter squad if he sees this Predator. I think he does see the Predator, so I'm surprised not to see him cancel the Bloodletters, because the Bloodletters, I mean, I guess if he gets a snare on the Predator with the Havoc, and then he teleports behind with both Bloodletters, could potentially do a lot of damage to that Predator. Still, it really isn't ideal, and he did nevertheless get those Bloodletters. I think it would have been better for him to cancel that Bloodletter as he saw the Predator, and then get out some kind of extra source of AV. Whatever that could be. He had the resources that he could have put a new Dreadnought out on the field. Now, a Dreadnought, even a Tzeentch Dreadnought, does not have the advantage over a Predator. But it would still definitely be better off combining the Tzeentch Dreadnought with the Tzeentch Havoc. Would still be a better situation for Noisy, I think, than having all these Bloodletters in combination with the Havoc. And as it is, he's double teleporting with the Bloodletters to deny a cap. And Noisy is in a tough situation right now where both he's fighting at a tech disadvantage and he is also low on VP. So he has to play both the map control game as well as try to fight off a superior army. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like Noisy's micro in this engagement, or even just the way things are going with the composition. He's forced to bring his Chaos Sorcerer back. His Chaos Sorcerer did get that side VP, and the Sorcerer is even now going for his natural. So he really is dedicating Sorcerer to map control at this point. The best option he has in terms of map control with the Vestments of the Warp. But when you have your Sorcerer on map control, you are, of course, sacrificing the fighting capabilities or just the actual engagement capabilities of the Sorcerer. And those engagement capabilities of the Sorcerer are very, very important. The Sorcerer really is, he is in many ways something that an engagement will hinge on. The results of an engagement really can hinge on what your Sorcerer does, whether that's teleporting in to tie up a key unit like a Havoc or a Devastator, or using something like Doom Bolts to take a critical unit down to a much lower health so that it needs to be forced off, or using Robes of Torment to halt the advance of melee units. So putting your Sorcerer in a map control situation is definitely not the best situation you want to be in. It's not something like the Warp Spider Exarch, where, I mean, even the Warp Spider Exarch, he can contribute to a lot of the ways, in a lot of the same ways that the Sorcerer does, by, again, tying up a key unit. But the Warp Spider Exarch is slightly better off used in a map control role than the Sorcerer. The Sorcerer, it is a bigger sacrifice to use your Sorcerer as map control than it is the Warp Spider Exarch.
The enemy is capturing one of our victory points.
Location secure.
But, I mean, Noisy's up against the wall here, or on the ropes, and he absolutely needs the map control. And Riku's still playing the map control game, and he still has 2 scouts. He has 2 scouts. They both have shotguns, but at this point, with a Predator, as well as this Apothecary, leveled Chaos Space Marines, leveled Assault Marines, he can probably afford to actually put 1 scout actually dedicated to map control. And this is forcing Noisy. He's regularly breaking 1 unit off. And he's regularly breaking one unit off to compete on map control. So we have a little dancing game going on where both players are moving around, not actually committing to huge engagements. And it's tough because now, by stalling out, Noisy he's getting to a point where Riku's going to be getting this Land Raider Redeemer out on the field. Now, unfortunately, I mean, Noisy might be trying to stall out so that he can get more resources to get some kind of new unit out on the field. But the challenge with that is that he's already behind on map control, and he's right now focusing purely on the VP, since that's what's going to be either what's going to keep him in this game or lose it for him. But by doing that, he really isn't concentrating on any of the resource points. So Riku has just had the way better end of resource control. And that's what allowed him to get to Tier 3, get this Land Raider Redeemer out on the field when Noisy is still stuck in Tier 2 with just a Dreadnought. And at this point, with this Land Raider Redeemer out on the field, that's probably going to be it for Riku. Just lost the Heretic squad, and that actually was the concede from Noisy. So, again, a very good educational game. Fantastic play. This was the set of the tournament with Noisy decisively taking that first game in really inspiring fashion. This game, Riku obviously answers back, and not as convincingly as Noisy, but still just showing his ability to adapt and showing what a high-level player he is. And then, of course, you have that third game, which, if you watched it, you know how incredible that is. And if you haven't watched it, you need to go to Ingrid's channel and see it, because it really is. It really does build on top of how incredible these first two games were, and just to give you a really incredible finish, the best game of the tournament. Hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.